Hello, and welcome to this Sage 300 training video. Today's topic will be Accounts Payable Payments. So let's first go to Accounts Payable. We could jump in straight away into Payment Batch List or Payment Entry. But before we do that, let's take a look at the AP Aging Report. The AP Aging Report can be found in AP Transaction Reports, Aged Payables. The Age Payables report will provide us a listing of the current documents that are due to our various vendors and show us how old they are. We can select Age Payables by either due date or document date, or further refine it down to just the overdue payables. We can age as of our current date, or we can select any date we want. Maybe we want to run a version of this report for documents aged of the end of last month. We then also want to update our cutoff date, and we can use the document date, the posting date, or the year period. I recommend using the year and period when you are trying to run a payables report for a specific fiscal period, historical fiscal period, especially when you are trying to tie that to the general ledger for the purpose of reconciliation. In which case you would also want to show your transactions through by the same date interval, make these two aligned. However, for general run-of-the-mill running of the report, to understand what I currently owe, you want to run that as of your current date and cut off probably by the doc date. In other words, take the system defaults. So you can go ahead and do that. Furthermore, you can select and filter your report by a few different things, such as it may be a specific vendor group or a range of vendors, or by several other metrics. Many of these down here are optional fields set up on my vendors. So I can run my selection and filter my report based on a number of different measures that I have set up in the system. I can also sort my vendors by, say, something like vendor groups, and subdivide my report so I can see different groups of vendors that are related to each other. There are a few other options on here. If you have transactions on hold, please remember you might need to check this box in order to include them on your report. If you are wondering why a particular vendor does not appear on your report, the first thing that you might want to check is vendors with a zero balance. If you do not owe a vendor, they will not show up on the report. You can hit the print button when you're ready. When the report arrives, you can see that it's got first of all, a vendor group here, ASC. That is our one vendor group, and it has one vendor, and it has a subtotal down here for that particular group. Then I have my next vendor group, INV, I think that's for inventory, and my first vendor is Chloride Systems, and it shows the open transactions. And if I go to the next page, I can see other vendors in that group and what is currently owed to them. And when I get to the bottom of that group, I can see my subtotal for that particular group and what is owed. And when I get to the very end, I can see my final vendor group subtotal, and then the report totals for each of the aging buckets and the percentage breakdown by each aging bucket. Please note that if you're looking here, you can see different transaction types referenced. Sometimes you might find a value that you're not quite sure what that means. Here on the last page, you will have a key as to what all the different codes mean. In this case, we're seeing IN consistently on this last page, which is invoice, which kind of makes sense because that's the most common document type. Your next most common document type is CR, although you'll probably see a few adjustments or debit notes or other types of transactions as you work through the system. This can be printed out, sent to a printer, or you can export it to something like a PDF or Excel if you need to. Once you've run your aging report, you can select particular documents from there that you want to pay. You can then come into payment entry or your payment batch list to process and create your payments. So you can come in here. I do not have any batches open, so there's nothing for me to select, so I'm going to hit the new button. And I'm going to say training batch and select the date. The next important thing here is bank. So if you have multiple bank accounts, you need to select which bank account you wish to process this payment batch from. Here we have defaulted in CCB, and that was configured in the setup for the accounts payable module as our default bank. However, that is not the bank I want to use today. I'm going to select Seattle Tacoma Bank. I'm then going to enter in my vendor number, and it's going to pull up into the system here their information. I can then hit the refresh button. I'm going to go ahead and make this just a little bit bigger so that you can see more information on here, and it's showing me all the open invoices for this particular vendor. And I'm going to pick the different documents that I want to pay. And as I move through, my payment amount gets updated. This is the amount of the check that I'm going to send to the supplier. So in this case, we are within the discount terms, so it is automatically taking the discount that was entered on this invoice. So my net balance is going to be 0. My invoice was for $1,000, but we only need to send $980 because we're taking the discount that is available. In other cases, you may want to partially pay an invoice. If that is the case, go into the applied amount. You can activate that cell by double-clicking on it, and then you can just change the amount in there to how much you actually want to pay them. Maybe there is some disagreement. Maybe there is a pending credit memo coming back for some reason, and you need to short pay that particular transaction. Just go into the field, change the amount, and the total will update accordingly. When you're ready, you can hit the Add button. I'm getting a warning that my remit to location for this particular invoice does not match the invoice's payments remit to location. I can go and ignore this if I want to, or I can remove that invoice and create another entry specifically for that transaction. Let's go ahead and we'll come back to this entry. I'm going to hit my select mode to get my full grid open here, and I'm going to say no to that particular transaction, and I'm going to select off of it. Notice my payment amount just went down, and I'm going to hit save, and now I can come in, hit a new button, select my same vendor again, refresh my grid. Notice now that it's got a whole bunch of pending for what is on that other payment that I'm going to do, and this one I'm just going to pay this one invoice. And I then want to select the remit to that I had put on the invoice, and I'm going to hit add. Now, if I had set that remit to location as primary, if I come in here and zoom in, I can see the information that's on here. There's a checkbox back on the actual setup for this remit to location, and if I had set that as primary, it would have defaulted in here, but that was not set as primary, so I had to manually select it. I'm going to hit the plus sign again and start another transaction. Now, there's more than one type of transaction that I can do in the payment entry screen. I can also do a prepayment, an apply document, or a miscellaneous payment. Let's take a look at these other transaction types. A prepayment is when I'm sending a deposit to a supplier. So I might pick my vendor number, and let's pick modern design here. I can put a reference and a note in here, and then I'm going to tell the system how much I need to send as my prepayment. I'm going to say $5,000. One thing I can do is say, I want to have this automatically apply to an invoice when the invoice is received and processed later on in the future in Sage. To do that, I want to select whether it should be an expected invoice number, a PO number, or an order number. Remember our invoice entry screen, we had those three fields on the invoice entry screen, and if the amount value here in the apply to field matches what's put in on the invoice, then Sage will automatically match these two documents up. Now I have a few documents in the system, so I can already select those. If I select a PO number, and I have a PO in the system for that particular supplier, I can go ahead and select that PO number, and it will automatically match up when that product is received and booked into the system. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add, and that will create a prepayment to that particular supplier. I'm going to skip apply document for the moment and go to miscellaneous payment. Sometimes I need to cut a check to somebody who is not, for something that's not on an invoice, or maybe to a supplier who I don't normally do business with. Maybe, for instance, I'm having a company picnic or party, and I'm hiring a catering service, and I'm not going to normally do business with them, but I do need to cut them a check. I could, of course, select an existing vendor and process it against them, or I can hit my remit to button and type in who that check should go to. Once I type in their information, I can hit the close button. That address will show up on the check, and I can proceed. I do need to give it an invoice number, but that could be as simply as doing something like the date. So then I can come in and give it a GL account, and I can type in the amount that I'm hiring the caterers for. When I'm done, I can hit the add button. All right, let's talk about printing checks. There is a print check button here. This button will print just the individual transaction that you see on the screen. But I want to print all 4 checks at once. To do so, I can close this. I can come over to my payment batch list, see my batch, and hit the print post button. I will now get a listing of all the different checks that I need to print. My system has already been set up and predefined thanks to my business partner with a default check template that matches my check stock. And my next check number here, in this case, happens to be 1, but I know I'm looking at my check stock and it needs to be 1001. So I can change my next check number to make sure that it matches my pre-printed check stock. Or if you're using blank check stock in something like PrintBoss, that number should already be filled in, and just use the next one in sequence. When I'm ready, I can hit the print button, and my check is all ready to be printed out on my pre-printed check stock. Your business partner can help you tailor the check stock to your needs, or help you set up PrintBoss and use blank check stock. I'm going to go ahead and hit the print button, send that to my printer, and then when I'm done, I can hit the close button here. I will now get a confirmation message asking were all checks printed successfully. If, for instance, one of my checks got mangled in the printer, I can say no. I can say not printed, or I can select multiple, or I can select a reprint range and select multiple checks and update them at once, then hit the reprint button, That will bring me right back to my printing screen, and I can hit print again and print those checks. Then it will ask me again, will all my checks printed successfully? Say yes, and go ahead and post my batch. Now, sometimes you need to create a payment that is not a check, but some kind of electronic payment. Maybe it's an automatic debit from your account. Maybe you're wiring the money to somebody. I'm going to go ahead and select my supplier, and I'm going to say my payment code here. And I have several different payments set up in my system. I'm going to select wire in this case. And then for the most part, it is the same process and procedure that we looked at a minute ago. I'm going to select the invoices I want to pay. And that's going to bring me my total. This should be what I transmit through the bank. And I'm going to hit the add button. If I want to do another one, I certainly can. And then when I'm ready, I can hit post. So the main thing is I'm changing the payment code here. The payment code will partially define whether or not I need to print out a physical piece of paper that is a check. A wire, in this case, our wire transfer payment code does not require that. So when I hit the post button, it's not going to invoke the check printing routine, and it's going to go straight ahead and post the batch. Now there's another payment type in here that we need to explore, and that is the apply document. To create an apply document, I first come into my transaction type and select apply document. What the apply document does is it lets you take two different transactions, one, a credit, a negative value on your aging, so typically a credit or an adjustment, maybe a prepayment that is sitting on your aging, and tie that to an open invoice. I'm going to go ahead and put in a vendor number, and I'm going to look at my document numbers here and see that I have one credit note sitting on the account where I have $108.25 as available credit. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to pull up my detail grid. I can go ahead and then start to enter multiple invoices that I want this to apply to. Now, I've applied it to 3 invoices, and I have $35.65 remaining. Now, all my other invoices are for a greater amount. So when I click on the next one and say yes over here, notice that my pending balance is $66.90. My applied amount is the $35.65, and so my net balance will be the difference of $31.25. And when I move off that, my unapplied amount moves to 0. So this will be a non-cash transaction. No, I'm not going to cut a check. It's not going to hit my bank account, but it's going to clear out several invoices and part of another one on this particular supplier. And then when I'm ready, I can hit add. There is another way also to take credits when you have them on your particular account. If I look at account, I think it was Xside here, I have, when I make a payment, I notice that I have a credit note. If I include that credit note in my list of invoices, so here I'm paying $1,000 on an invoice for $1,066 and taking my credit note of $105, Sage is automatically calculating the net amount that I will be sending to the supplier, and both of these lines will appear on the remittance stub when I cut that check. And so I can hit the add button. When I'm done and with all my entries, just like any others, I can go ahead and save and post that batch. So I'm going to go ahead and print that just so you can see the statement. There's only one check that we're actually processing because the other one was an apply document. And here I can see on my remittance, I'm taking the credit note for $105 and the invoice for $1,000. And my grand total of net amount is $961. So I'm communicating to my supplier that I'm taking the credit note against this invoice. And that concludes our training today on payment entry. Thank you for watching and have a great day.